Let me point out the obvious. BACC, which is the Bel Air Country Club, is a club of gentlemen and gentlewomen. Gentlemen are not felons, and felons in turn are not gentlemen. You cannot be a member in good standing and guilty of a felony at the same time. It is a non sequitur. Referring to felons as gentlemen in good standing is nothing more than an attempt to legitimize their continued membership. That this situation resulted from their actions outside the club can only be considered a failed attempt at misdirection, as it is completely irrelevant. These felony guilty pleas are of their own making, and reputational harm comes from their continued membership affiliation with the club. Suspending membership while the offender is imprisoned is an illusory penalty and does nothing to address the reputational damage brought on by their continued membership. Now, this should be offensive to any American. If you're facing a felony charge, it's really helpful to watch what's going on in the country. And we can learn a lot from what happened to this celebrity couple that was indicted in this Varsity Blues case. You may be familiar with it. You couldn't not be in America and not be familiar with it, because it was a story of a group of wealthy people who used their influence to try and get their children into prestigious universities. And two of the most high-profile people that went through this process are Loughlin and Mossimo. I think his name is pronounced Giannulli, but I may be pronouncing it wrong. In any event, what is important to look at, it says, well, if this is what's happening to high-profile celebrity people, what can I learn? What will happen to me? And one of the things that we can look at is just say, how did their community respond to them? Let me take a pause right now and just read a letter that is widely circulated, published by TMZ, brought us attention to this, about how their country club, the Bel Air Country Club, looked at these two long-standing members and looked at them differently as a result of what happened to them. And so I'm going to pause right now and just read the letter, and I'll publish it here on the screen so that you can follow along with this link to the original article at TMZ. So this is a letter from Michael E. Gallagher, dated June the 6th, 2020. It's from the board of directors at the Bel Air Country Club. Gentlemen, on June 1st, the membership was notified of the disposition of the Varsity Blues matter, wherein two members of the club have pled guilty to felony charges. The board has unanimously voted, effective immediately, to suspend both members involved in their personal legal challenges until, emphasis added, they have completed their obligation to the government. The above statement is misleading. What it does not clearly state is that the memberships of these felons continues essentially unabated. Suspension implies that a member otherwise capable of using the club is prohibited from access for a period of time as punishment for a serious infraction. However, these individuals will be incarcerated for most, if not all, of the suspension period and will continue as members in good standing when released. This unprecedented board decision to allow felons to continue as members causes irreparable reputational harm to the club and its members. Will we any longer be able to deny membership to convicted felons sponsored for membership? If the denial is based on the candidate's felony conviction, the answer would now appear to be no. Will the club now be perceived as one that welcomes felons? Undeniably, the answer to that question is now yes. Now, that's an important takeaway for anybody that's going into this system. This is how society perceives people with felony convictions. Let's continue with reading. Let me point out the obvious. BACC, which is the Bel Air Country Club, is a club of gentlemen and gentlewomen. Gentlemen are not felons, and felons in turn are not gentlemen. You cannot be a member in good standing and guilty of a felony at the same time. It is a non sequitur. Referring to felons as gentlemen in good standing is nothing more than an attempt to legitimize their continued membership. That this situation resulted from their actions outside the club can only be considered a failed attempt at misdirection, as it is completely irrelevant. These felony guilty pleas are of their own making, and reputational harm comes from their continued membership affiliation with the club. Suspending membership while the offender is imprisoned is an illusory penalty and does nothing to address the reputational damage brought on by their continued membership. Now, this should be offensive to any American, because if somebody knows something about the criminal justice system, it's how easily an individual can be charged with a felony crime. If you look at even our president of the United States, some of his actions would have been prosecuted if he were not a man of wealth and privilege. There are many people serving time in prison today for doing the same things that he did, but the difference is he was not charged with a felony, they were. And that as a result, we still hold him, or many millions still hold him in high esteem, but other people are serving time in prison for that. I have so many examples where you can see the difference of what happens to people of wealth and power. Take a look at many people who are getting... I'm not saying that Michael Flynn should not be in prison. I am not saying that that the other fellow, Roger Stone, should go to prison. What I am saying is that if you are a person of power and privilege, you may have an ability to influence the system in a way that other people cannot. But anybody can be charged with a crime. Anybody can work toward making amends and reconciling with society, and anybody should be able to get back on with their lives. But as we see, the collateral consequences of a felony conviction stay with a lot of people forever. And the more we understand about that, the more steps that we can take to prepare. What we don't want to do is go through this blindly. And this is a very clear example of what happens for people of wealth, but also people who lack that strength. And so the more we understand, the more we know, the more we can make amends. So let's continue with this letter. The board action taken on behalf of the club's membership now establishes our club as a place of refuge and comfort for known felons. Reputational harm be damned. There is no fiduciary duty which justifies harm such as this to the membership. The fiduciary duty of the board requires instead it should shield the club by expulsion of the offending parties. Clearly, the board has concluded that the commission of a felony does not bar an individual from membership. Further, it appears that the board has concluded that harboring felons does not besmirch the reputation of the club or its members. I wholeheartedly disagree. This matter is already well known in the golfing world, domestically and internationally, and our club has become a laughingstock. Let me also address a couple of rumors I have heard. Some members apparently believe the board to be fatally conflicted in making this decision, that a less favored member would have been expelled without question. I cannot believe the board would sacrifice its integrity by allowing any conflicted board member to participate in discussions or voting on such an important matter. Yet it seems board members who would appear beholden to the parties in question did participate in this decision. In addition, I have heard that some members believe the board has substituted its judgment for that of the law and the courts in determining whether felony crimes is serious. That white-collar crime does not count. This surely cannot be the case. The board could be so unwise as to put itself in the position of judging felonies on a subjective scale, deeming some acceptable and others not. It is, after all, well accepted that a felony is a serious crime, and in this case, a crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Have we now been put into a position where we would entertain evaluating the qualifications of the likes of Bernie Madoff and Bruce McNall? Now, this is such a self-righteous letter that it on its face is really disturbing to me. It's disturbing to me, and it's one of the reasons I work so hard to try and change the outcomes of the criminal justice system, primarily by bringing awareness to it. If this is what happens to somebody that is a well-known celebrity, what happens to people without that reach? This is an awful situation for any American, because it applies like the scarlet letter to anybody who may have been wrapped up into this system for regardless of good reason or bad. Rather than looking at an individual's ability to reconcile and make amends, they are just casting stones and saying, we want people that have gone through this system to have a scarlet letter that they wear for the rest of their lives. If they haven't read the Bible and looked at the story of Jesus, said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And this person say, I would have never committed a felony. But what he doesn't know are how easily it is in a system that it really prides itself on law and order and being the world's greatest incarcerator, how easily somebody can come into this system. This individual doesn't realize that an overzealous prosecutor can find a felony in just about anybody. Now, I don't know, maybe Michael Gallagher is, a candidate for sainthood, and he's never done anything that a prosecutor could not bring criminal charges against. I just highly doubt it. It's because I'm very cynical about the system. And it's because I really believe that every individual has the ability to atone, make amends, reconcile, and go on to live a life of meaning with dignity and relevance. And it is a shame when somebody denies them or encourages or suggests that they cannot. Now, he goes on, as a 25-year member in good standing and a gentleman by act of Congress, I choose not to associate with known felons. As my wife says, good riddance to this self-righteous prick. This board decision, however, forces acceptance of felons upon the membership. Grata catala felonum. Oh, he throws in the Latin, and I'm not going to take the time to look it up. I believe that to be an abrogation of the board's fiduciary duty. I also believe it puts to waste the reputation of our 100-year-old institution. This is probably an institution that once excluded blacks and excluded women. I don't know the background of it, but it seems like this is the kind of guy that would support that type of club. Further, it is my judgment that integrity provisions in today's employment contracts would inhibit corporate officers from joining clubs known to harbor felons. This board's action in this matter has destroyed the club's reputation and put its future in serious jeopardy. Let's just explore a little bit about what it means, known harbor felons. Okay, take a look at the Alien and Sedition Act that was in existence back in the presidency of John Adams. Did you know that it would have been a felony crime punishable by 10 years in the penitentiary to criticize the government? That's the Alien and Sedition Act, an act that the president would like to bring back, as a matter of fact. But the reality is, it is so wrong to say that a snapshot in time that some individual made at the worst possible time in his life can have lifelong ramifications. I have been informed that the board is not willing to set aside this decision and take the cleansing action so desperately needed, namely terminating the memberships of the offending parties. That being the case, I am sadly left no choice but to hereby resign from the club I have long loved. Regretfully, Michael E. Gallagher, past president. My hopes are that you will Google Michael E. Gallagher, find out a little bit about his business, and then maybe avoid using that business. Sometimes laws are good, sometimes laws are bad, but that does not influence what a human being is. And every human being has the power within to make amends, to reconcile, and to make contributions to society. It is a travesty of justice when we fail to recognize that in our community. Now, it's really sad for me when I listen to how society perceives people who have gone through the criminal justice system. I went into the criminal justice system in 1987 because of bad decisions that I made when I was 20 years old. But those decisions have lifelong ramifications. That's something that anybody who is facing a challenge with the criminal justice system, whether they're pre-indictment, whether they are in prison, whether they have come home, they should be thinking about and then figuring out, well, how am I going to respond to society's perceptions? Because society is not going to see us the same way that we see ourselves. And we've got to be thinking about that as we move forward. So, for those who are not familiar with the system, we could just kind of go through the process. The first process, of course, is that prosecutors or investigators look for a crime, and then they may persuade prosecutors that a crime has been committed, and that follows with either a criminal indictment or a criminal information or some type of a charging instrument. And when that happens, all too often, the government will then send a group of law enforcement officers. If it's in the federal system, it will probably be the FBI, it could be the Department of Homeland Security, it could be the DEA, it could be others that will storm the residence and take this person into custody, as they did for all of these people in the Varsity Blues case. And why did they do that? Well, the reason that the government does that for people who are considered to be trophies is that really helps bring awareness to this nation's commitment to law and order, something that the president is really talking a lot about right now. And the more we understand that, the more we as individuals can say, okay, what can I do in response to the way this big criminal justice machine is going to suck me into the system? How long is it going to keep me sucked into the system? What are the different procedures that are going to follow? Well, the next procedure that's going to follow for somebody who's just been charged is a plea. And that plea agreement is most likely going to start off with not guilty, while the defense attorney team is going to start working on their discovery to see what can the government prove. Because a criminal case requires the government to convict somebody beyond a reasonable doubt. That means a member of jury must have a unanimous finding that that a crime has been committed beyond a reasonable doubt. That really is a point of confusion for a lot of people that come into the system that believe, well, I'm innocent until I'm proven guilty. I can tell you what my judge said to me when I went to trial, or what rather he said to the members of the jury. They said, you have to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, that doesn't mean you can have no doubt. You can still have a little bit of doubt and convict him. So that's kind of, to think that you're going to have a system of balance and fairness is disingenuous. Because when a judge is saying you can have a little bit of guilt and still convict him, that's going to lead the typical member of a jury to return an indictment with a conviction, with a guilty verdict. And if that happens, the exposure to sentencing is significantly longer. So it's important to take all of this into your consideration and into your calculus as you're going into the system. I mean, after all, who is going to sit on the jury? Most likely it's going to be nurses and teachers and postal workers and firemen and people who look in the world from a very clinical perspective. And so they are recognizing themselves, well, I've never seen my name, United States of America versus my name. So if I see United States of America versus the defendant, I may have a predisposition to say, well, this person is already guilty, because that would have never happened to me. What they don't understand is that in the United States, we have so many laws on the books, it's very easy for prosecutors to to result in a conviction if there is an indictment. And an indictment is super easy for prosecutors to get because it happens without any input from the defendant himself. So many people will start off with a not guilty plea, just as these people did. They will push the government to the test, and eventually their attorneys will tell them, look, it's going to be very tough to get a deal. It's going to prevail in trial. The winds are not blowing in your favor. Let's change the plea, which is exactly what happened in the case of, let's just call them Loughlin and Mossimo, because I can't pronounce their last names. And then when that happens, of course, there's a media frenzy if you are considered a trophy. If you're not considered a trophy, you still can face challenges. You will still find a Google search of your name will result in a lot of information coming to the felony charge. So it's important to take this into your calculus as well as you are moving forward. You can look at you should be thinking about, what can I do to influence a better outcome? Because although you may be spinning out of control right now, the reality is you can start sowing seeds for the rest of your life to overcome this. But it's not an overnight fix. If you look at Google my name, for example, Michael Santos, you will see I control all of the narrative on my Google page, and it's all positive. Even though I was in prison for 26 years, I control the narrative. This is the same thing that anybody can begin doing if they're willing to put forward the work. And that's what I would encourage anybody to do. Educate yourself on the process, and as you educate yourself on the process, figure out, what can I do to make things better? If you know what's coming, you can begin sowing seeds for a better outcome. And also think about the community. Think about the community that you're from and how that community is going to react to the situation you're in right now. If you're in a community that is a professional community, maybe you're a doctor, maybe you're a dentist, maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you're a professional of some kind, that community tends to look with disfavor on people who have been brought into the criminal justice system. Again, go back to that letter that Mr. Gallagher at the Bel Air Country Club wrote about these two people that were formerly considered, leading citizens. But because they're now brought into the criminal justice system, society looks at them differently, and that is going to be the case for decades to come unless they do something about it. Now, of course, most people don't come from a background of privilege and wealth. And so what can that person be doing or thinking about as they're going into this journey? The reality is that our nation's criminal justice system represents one of the greatest social injustices of our time. It generally afflicts people of color and people without power more than people of privilege. But when people of privilege come into the system, the media and the community may really frown upon them. And so it's important to understand that and say, what can I do about it? And that's what we try to do at Prison Professors, is we try and show how this exposure is going to work, but in a manner that is much, that we hope is more strategic. Because if I understand what's coming, I can take efforts to get the best possible outcome at every stage in the journey. There's so much to consider that I may not be thinking about when I'm trapped in the situation itself. I've got to be thinking about this felony charge and what is the aftermath going to be? How is this really going to influence my life going forward? And more importantly, what can I do about it right now? And it's never too early, it's never too late to begin sowing seeds for a better outcome. But in this case of this country club situation, I can expect, and I empathize with anybody that's going into the criminal justice system. I empathize with any family member, whether it's a person of color that doesn't have strong connections, whether it's somebody from the middle class that doesn't fully understand what's coming, whether it is a professional that may lose their licensing, whether it's a business owner that may have to make different strategic decisions, or even whether it's somebody that's wealthy, or even a politician that's coming into the system. At Prison Professors, I don't make a judgment. What I do is I say, look, this is perhaps one of the greatest social injustices of our time. It swallows anybody into it, and anybody that comes into it, it's like they get afflicted with some type of, I'm filming this in late June 2020 during the era of the pandemic and the coronavirus. It's like you get the coronavirus. It can attack anyone. But the reality is you can take precautions, or somebody can take precautions and say, well, this is a situation that I have. What is the equivalent? What is the remedy that I can do? And I can only share you what worked for me while I was going through 9,500 days in prison. There was always a strategy. And that strategy is what we describe in our programs as the CEO mindset. We've got to look that there is a problem. And if there is a problem, I've got to say, well, what is the potential solution? What is the best possible outcome? Not necessarily the best outcome. The best outcome is the government drops the case and lets me move on with my life. But that's probably not the best possible outcome. What can I do? Once I figure out success, then I can create a strategy that I can document. Then I can create tools, tactics, and resources that I could use to execute on that strategy. And then I can measure my progress every single day. That is what led to success in every person's life, regardless of what level of success they achieved. It was always, I could use my wife as an example. She fell in love with me when I was in prison and still had 10 years to serve. We recognize that there's a problem. I'm in prison. I'm in love with her. She's in love with me. But as a long-term prisoner, I've got to be thinking about how am I going to get through this and how is she going to get through this? That's a problem. What's the solution? Well, we know that we need to create a situation that she can earn a livable wage regardless of what they do to me. That's a potential solution. We're going to document, that's what we're going to pursue. What should we do? She's going to become a nurse. Then she develops the tools, tactics, and resources to become a registered nurse. She measures her progress by going through prerequisites, by going through school to become a certified nurse's aide, and then a licensed vocational nurse, and then a registered nurse, and then a master's educated nurse. And that process, what does it do? It restores confidence for her. It restores confidence for me. It allows us to succeed as we define success given the challenges of our kind of unusual life, with me serving a 45-year sentence, her being in love with me, even though I had 10 years to serve. We pursued that strategy to build our life. That is not a boilerplate answer. Okay, that is a personal answer. And we would recommend anybody, including these people, Lori and Mossimo, think about how are they going to define success. And one strategy that they may use is to look at different case studies of people who are kind of like them. And one of the things that we do at Prison Professors is really continue the work that I started when I was going through prison. And that's really to learn lessons of documenting strategies that other people used. One of my good friends and mentors, I'm just going to use his first name today. His name is Lee, but he is similar in a category of wealth as these two people. Why? Well, he owns a retail establishment that employs more than 1,000 people. It's privately held. He owns shopping centers and real estate and other businesses, has a private jet, really successful guy. You'd think that, and he went to prison for a tax-related offense, that to me seems preposterous that would have put him in prison for this. I mean, this is an individual who employs more than 1,000 people, generates tens of millions of dollars in tax revenues, but he went to prison because of a vindictive employee, turned him in for flying his own jet and not making appropriate tax calculations for the use of his own private jet. He didn't have shareholders. He didn't have anybody else. And I'm not making an excuse for him or validating him. All I am saying is that he's an individual that went into the system, high net worth, had to make adjustments because of the criminal convictions. What are those adjustments? Well, he had to remove himself as the CEO of a businesses that he founded because it was a very big business generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues, and the bank didn't want to do business with somebody who had a felony background. You make adjustments, you do something about it, and you're able to move forward. So that's something for you to be thinking about. If you've got a felony charge, how is this going to affect my banking relationships? Country club memberships are going to be the least of your worries because we deal in a system that has collateral consequences for people with felonies. And that's the case whether somebody has a GED and is trying to get housing or trying to get credit, or somebody that has its own private jet and may have some implications that are particular to that individual. But there's always a strategy that somebody can pursue. How about what follows after the other side of the journey? Well, there's always a term of supervised release. More I know about supervised release early, the more seeds that I can sow to influence that at the sentencing hearing. Again, it is a very simple SWOT analysis, and we would know how to use that if we were architecting a business, right? We would know how to think about our strengths. We would know how to think about our weaknesses. We would know how to think about the opportunity costs and the threats that accompany every decision. But if you don't know, you can make situations worse. Like my friend, another case study, whose name is Greg, who had some challenges after he finished a 1-year sentence for a securities fraud violation. Now, he was the CEO of a publicly traded company, did his time in prison very successfully, despite my opinion of him shouldn't have even gone to prison. I mean, I look at our nation's criminal justice system as just being so overwrought with problems that I can give so many examples of people that would be far better served with a civil response than a criminal response. But if you don't know the system, you don't know how to sow seeds today that will allow you to bear fruit in the months, years, and decades ahead. And that was a challenge that he faced because once he was on supervised release, after a short period of time, the probation officer chose to what's called issue a violation. Not because he committed a new crime, but because the terms of his supervised release in the eyes of the probation officer were not adhered to. And that resulted in a new judicial proceeding, the possibility of a return to prison. Fortunately, he was able to prevail in that matter, but there are many people without those resources that do go back to prison, not for criminal behavior, but for such acts as sleeping at your girlfriend's house without permission from your probation officer. The more you understand about the system, the more you can sow seeds that will put you on a better pathway. What about travel? Once you go through the system, how will it influence your travel, your ability to travel? I can tell you another case study about my friend Gary. Now, Gary went to prison also for a securities-related violation. We became very good friends when we were serving time together, but when he came home, he didn't realize the importance of getting permission to travel from one jurisdiction to another. And when his probation officer gave him a challenge the first time, he said, I'm just not even going to tell them when I move to jurisdiction, when I want to leave the jurisdiction, because it can lead to too many problems. Well, he was in the Central District of California, where I am, and there are 4 districts in California. There is Los Angeles, which is the Central District, Orange County. There is the Southern District, which is San Diego. There is the Northern District, which is San Francisco. And there is the Eastern District, which is like east of Los Angeles. So like Bakersfield and Fresno and that area, the Central Valley. And those 4 districts, in order for you to go from one district to the other, you have to get permission. And so this person, just before he was able to finish his term of supervised release, the probation officer asked to see the receipts of his credit cards, and he saw that he purchased gasoline one day in San Francisco. He bought lunch one time in San Diego, and during the 3 years he was in, maybe he drove over and bought fuel in Bakersfield, for example. Well, those 3 things, the probation officer said, I didn't give you permission to be in those jurisdictions. And the result, he went back to prison for 6 months. During that time that he was in prison the second time, his life just really fell apart. And it's understandable why that can happen, because you get moving, you get your life back in order, but that you find yourself back in prison. That would conflict any human being. But it afflicts many more people without status and power than the wealthy. Regardless of who you are, though, if you understand the system, you can sow seeds for a better outcome. How about financials? You know, one of a good friend of mine, his name is Mark, is also a high net worth person that I met in prison. We went through supervised release together, and part of it is that you have to submit these detailed financial reports every month. But if you've got a very complicated financial financial status with multiple business, multiple bank accounts, multiple expenditures, your probation officer may object to you not providing absolute detail to every one of these transactions. And for somebody that's of moderate means, that's really not the biggest deal in the world. But for somebody who's got 15 bank accounts, 15 businesses, all types of things where your net worth is changing all the time, a probation officer isn't going to understand that. And they may provide restrictions on you if you don't take precautions that have enormous implications. So whether you are on the low end of the income level, the high end of the income level, understand that once you've been charged with a felony, there are lifelong ramifications, including how you communicate with others. My business partner, Justin Paperny, runs our sister site called White Collar Advice, where he provides, sentence mitigation strategies and one-on-one consulting to people. And he's been doing it ever since he came out of prison. But it's because he sowed the seeds in advance that absolved him from facing challenges with his probation officer, because one of the terms of supervised release is you can't communicate or interact with other people who have felony backgrounds. There's always a way to overcome it. It just doesn't happen by accident. So think about what your purpose is as you go through these challenges, but do not think that you are immune from all of the ancillary consequences that follow mass incarceration. If you understand what those challenges are, you can take a proactive approach, like Michael Milken. Many of you may remember Michael Milken from the 1990s when he was really vilified as being the king of junk bonds. And, they put him in prison for 10 years. But he did some mitigation work that resulted or contributed to his getting out of prison in less than 3 years. And if you Google his name right now, he's much more well known for his contributions to medical science and cancer research and education, because he has created a very solid mitigation strategy. And that's something that you could be thinking about if you're facing a challenge. You could take the flip side and look at Martha Stewart, who many of you may remember went to prison not necessarily for a bad crime, but rather how she responded to the crime in trying to use her influence to pressure other people to do certain things. And as a result, I think she was charged with obstruction of justice. She eventually pleaded guilty, but there were, enormous lifelong ramifications even for her. So this is why I really encourage you, if you're going into this system, to be thinking about how will this change my life. And we would ask that you subscribe to the Prison Professors program. We produce new content every day with hopes of helping people make better decisions, whether they are facing sentencing, whether they are going into the prison system, whether they're even in prison system, or whether they've come out. The more we know, the more we understand, the better we can move forward. And I ask you, if you use CBD, please support our sponsors at CBDTV.com. They provide the resources for us to produce this content and distribute it to jails and prisons free of charge. If the prisons won't buy it, because our mission and objective is to really improve the outcomes of the system. And we do that through producing this content every single day with hopes that it helps you and others. If you want more information, please text the word PREPARE to 44222, and you can get information that will help you regardless of what stage of the journey you're in. You could also get the same information by just visiting clicking the link on the top of our YouTube channel. And on that channel, you will see a little free guide. Just enter your email and you can immediately get the book Prepare for free. I'm Michael Santos with the Prison Professors. We hope that you found some value in this messages. Please leave your comments below. Share the message if you find value. But if you're facing challenges with the criminal justice system, regardless of what stage you're in, make sure that you understand there are steps that you can take to get a better outcome. Thanks.